Hello and welcome to Thursday, another Thursday here on Viking.TV. I'm Anne Diamond, and it's great to be with you again for another interview with someone I know you're going to find absolutely fascinating. But first, today I got an email that stopped me in my tracks because it was headlined, "Congratulations, today your new baby will be delivered, weighing in at 48,000 tons. And that new baby is, of course, Viking's new ship, the Viking Venus. Today, in a ceremony which is usually packed with people and speeches and flags and a great deal of celebration, but which had to be quiet and remote, Viking took delivery of the ship from the shipyard. Of course, she's already been fitted out and completed her sea trials, but this is a milestone occasion because the Viking Venus is leading the return to sailing. As you may know by now, I've been invited by the godmother to the ship, and we'll have the naming ceremony and inaugural voyage in a few weeks' time now. And then we'll start sailing around the coast. So that today was very big news for Viking and a very big baby being delivered. Let's have a look at that delivery right now.
Compliment, Captain. I wish you calm sea and good wind.
Thank you very much, and we will be back to pick up another one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck. Thank you.
Gosh, it was a lovely sunny day in Italy this morning. Now to my special guest today, an author who has written so many books over a vast writing career that when his fans ask questions about them, he has trouble actually remembering some of the characters and plot lines because he wrote them some 30 years ago in some cases. In fact, the total comes to about 60 books and sales of 30 million books worldwide. Yet the reason he became a writer in the first place was not really quite some burning ambition, but necessity and love. His own backstory reads like a romantic novel. I'm sure he'll tell us more about that in just. Yet he's famous for writing gritty, expansive, epic historical novels, which are absolutely beloved by loyal readers. And he rewards that loyalty by writing more and more, often 2 books every year. Many have been made into TV and film films, and most of us have seen them. Think particularly of the Sharpe books, serialized on TV by the equally gritty and gorgeous Sean Bean. And he was, of course, Sharpe. Sharpe was, of course, the brilliant but wayward British soldier, fighting through how many books now? Something like 21 in the Napoleonic Wars and onwards into civilian life. And that's just Sharpe. There are another 30-something books to talk about, set in different historical eras. And the latest to be dramatised for TV is the series of books about the making of England, the Saxon Stories series, which Netflix is adapting, and they're calling it The Last Kingdom. Would you like a sneak preview? Let's have a look at the trailer.
I've lost my home. I've lost my name. I'm no longer Richard of Bevonbar.
How has it come to this?
When the kings are dead, we will sit on Alfred's throne.
we banished the Danes within our lifetime.
Why do you choose them? They are my people.
When we fight with one heart!
I know you will do what is right.
Stand back!
Where does it come from? This courage.
Oh yes, blood and guts and romance and sex. Let's meet the man behind those thrilling stories of yore, author Bernard Cornwell, who joins us from his library at his home in Cape Cod in Massachusetts, USA. Bernard, welcome. It's lovely to see you.
It's very nice to see you, Anne. Thank you for asking me.
Oh, well, tell me about the library behind you, because I gather you had it made for you. It's your den.
It is, yes, I had it built. We were very lucky and had some spare land, and I have far too many books. So I thought, well, let's build a library for them. So here it is.
And outside, what is your view? I mean, I know you're in Cape Cod, so are you overlooking the sea or what?
No, we're in the woods, so we look out on woodland.
So it's trees and greenery and nature.
We have a guest house which is on the sea, so if you come and stay, you get to live there.
Okay, is that an invitation? Because that sounds really nice. and that is where you work. And I know that in the past that you have churned out something like 2 books a year, actually more sometimes. Do you work to a strict schedule, and is that where you do it, where you're sitting now?
Yeah, this is where I do it. And I find it incredibly difficult to work anywhere else. I suppose because I'm so spoiled here, because all the reference books are here. And everything I need is here.
How has the last year been for you?
It's been odd in some ways, but quite normal in others. I mean, writing is a solitary vice, so it's not unusual to be all on your own for a large part of the day, except for a small dog. And but of course, we've missed going out to eat, we've missed seeing friends, and we've missed travel.
Yes.
I mean, normally Judy and I go to London a couple of times a year. Well, it's been over a year since we've been there. We miss that. But as for writing, I mean, COVID is perfectly okay.
Absolutely. What have you written in the last year? How much have you written?
Well, in the last year, let me think, I finished the last of the Last Kingdom books, The Warlord, and I'm now writing the 22nd Sharpe book, which is, I'm on the last chapter, but it all needs rewriting, so.
Oh, I thought the last one was the last one.
No, there's never a last one while you're alive.
No, because you can actually do prequels and things like that as well, can't you?
It's like a farewell tour, you know, another one will follow.
But before we go on to Sharpe, congratulations, by the way, on the Last Kingdom, the last Kingdom, because it's been so well reviewed, and people have, and your fans, who are, as I said, are so loyal, have said, thank goodness that you tied up loose ends and you provided a proper ending, because I think so many times nowadays we, the audience, get cheated when we don't get a proper ending.
Well, yeah, you have to do a proper ending, and I'm a great believer in happy endings, that what the audience wants is probably going to happen. And I think it's very frustrating and annoying if you just leave things way up in the open. I mean, when you write a series, as I've written 2 or 3, I mean, some books, a lot does have to stay dangling, but that just makes you buy the next book. At least I hope it.
I know, isn't it astonishing how I don't know whether you would have ever planned it, and we'll talk about that maybe later, but you have written so much, so many stories that have ended up being in series. I mean, Sharpe, 21 books, 22 now, you say. These Saxon, these early chronicles have gone on. Did you ever plan that you would write 10, 12 books about the same sort of characters?
Yes. Because very much my inspiration was Forrester's Hornblower, and I think there were 11 Hornblowers. And I mean, it seems a pretty obvious thing, but if you like the first one, you're going to buy the second one, and if you like those, you're going to buy the third. So yes, it was. I did want to write a series, and not just to make people buy them, but because you can explore so much in several books over one man's life.
Well, surely the secret as well is investing in a character, isn't it? And if you can get your loyal readers to invest and care about a character, then you're going to care enough to want to go on reading about them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's like I love John Sandford's book, but because again, they're series, and you go back because you want to know more Lucas Davenport or Virgil Flowers, and you know you buy a Virgil Flowers cookbook because you like him so much.
Do you ever get blasé about the fact that time and again you manage to write #1 bestsellers and books that love to be picked up by the publishers and picked up by TV and drama makers? Does it just become in the end something that you just take into account, or does it still give you a thrill?
It gives me a thrill. Every time I start a book, I think I can't do this. This is ridiculous. I shouldn't be trying. And at that point, all you can do is just bash on, try and see if you can do it. No, I mean, it always seems rather precarious to me. And I count myself very, very lucky.
Well, you clearly know how to do it. When you do sell a book to a movie maker, TV maker, how much control do you retain?
None at all, absolutely none. And that's how I want it. I mean, both Granada, when they made the Sharpe films, and Carnival Films, who are the wonderful producers of The Last Kingdom, both said to me, do I want to be a technical advisor? And I just said, no, absolutely not. I mean, my view is that any thoughts I have are most likely going to be an obstacle in their way. The fool doesn't put an obstacle in these people's way. I mean, they know a million times more than I do about how to make television drama. So the less I'm involved, the better. So I try and stay out of it, other than being a cheerleader, which I regard as my job.
Oh, well, not just a cheerleader. I mean, in the last production, you've actually been involved.
Yes, they very kindly asked me if I wanted to have a cameo appearance. And I thought that would be fun. And it was huge fun. I mean, they flew me to Hungary for a few days, and I had hair extensions down to my waist, which almost restored me to my teenage years. And joined them on the film set, and it was wonderful.
We've got, oh yes, you look there at your hair extensions.
And the bags under my eyes.
Well, yes, you were clearly playing a part.
I look rather a debauched Viking, don't I?
Yes, exactly, but that must have been tremendous fun to be part of it.
It was, and they're very, I mean, like all the actors I've ever met, they're always very, very nice people, and they're always interesting to be around, and they're very welcoming and very helpful. So it was a wonderful few days.
And were you aware at all of any changes that the screenplay writers might have made to your own script? Were you aware of that? Did it bother you at all?
No, I mean, I know they're going to make changes because they have constraints I don't have. I mean, if I think a book is flagging a bit, needs a bit of excitement, I can invent a whole Viking fleet. They can't, because that costs money. So I expect them to change things. And Judy and I watch the series just like any other viewer. We don't know what's coming. And the number of times I've said to her, oh, that's so clever what they've just done. And then she'll say to me, why did he do that? I say, I don't know. I only wrote the books. But I love them. I love the series. And I think they've done wonderfully well. And I think the changes they've made are usually terrific. And my view is it's added value. You know, you get all the skills of actors, producers, directors, makeup people, set people, all being added into the book. So for me, this is just adds value to the original.
It is fascinating, isn't it? Yes, what they can do. And you must be asked an awful lot of times from some of your biggest fans, should I read the book first or watch the movie first?
Oh, I say read the book.
Hmm.
And buy the book, I say. You'll enjoy it far more if you buy the book.
We've even got a scene in which you play. This is absolutely a cracker for anyone watching at the moment who's a really big Bernard Cornwell fan, because you're in the Last Kingdom and you even have words to speak, which they trust.
I even had words.
Well, I mean, that is such an honour. Shall we have a look at this little clip now of your little part in your cameo in the Last Kingdom?
Uhtred.
Stop. Listen.
He's gone. Like smoke.
You know how to use it. Pointy end forward, as Punic would say.
We should divide. We divide. Pointy end forward.
Shh.
Oh dear, you meet a grisly end.
Yes, killed by my own hero. I love it.
Oh yes, that is ironic. And also, I would say never stop to answer the call of nature in the middle of a battle.
Well, we didn't know we were in a battle. So it seemed...
Well, anywhere actually in a
Actually, the director had asked me, how can we get you separated from the others? And I said, well, I can have a pee in the stream. And he said, good idea. So my television debut as an actor is actually peeing in a Hungarian stream.
Well, that's another story for you, isn't it? Yeah. And it's interesting because I know that, I mean, we'll talk more about this as well, the fact that you were a TV producer and a very esteemed one in Britain before you went into acting. But clearly there's always been a little bit of an itch there to act.
Yes, I can. Yeah, guilty. I plead guilty to that.
And you've been involved in a community theatre or a student theatre where you live now.
Yes, I was incredibly lucky. It happened about a dozen years ago. We have a theatre in town, or I say we had, it's just been sold, where every summer a group of drama students from all across North America would come and after auditions, and they would put on 8 plays in 12 weeks. And the directors were all professionals from London or New York. And very often the older actors were also professional actors from, again, London or New York. And I mean, it was absolutely wonderful because these young people had immense enthusiasm, often terrific skills. And it meant I spent my summer with some 30 or 40, 20 to 30-year-olds who were irreverent, enthusiastic and huge fun. And for some strange reason, they asked me, I think it was my English accent, whether I wanted to play in a Shakespeare play. And I said yes, and immediately regretted it. This was 12 years ago, and ended up 10 years later playing Prospero in The Tempest, which was an extraordinary privilege to play a major Shakespearean part with a professional director and a lot of kids, many of whom have gone on to Broadway. So it was a wonderful experience for a dozen years. And I was in musicals. I had a solo in Man of La Mancha, which still keeps me awake at night. I played Sextimus the Silent in Once Upon a Mattress, the Rabbi in Fiddler on the Roof. I mean, I think I was in 38 productions altogether.
My goodness.
And it was a huge privilege. I mean, most of all, I think working with these kids, because as I say, writing is very much a solitary vice. Then suddenly for 3 months in the summer, I was part of a company.
Did they know your books?
They got to know them.
I'll bet. Talking of your books, tell us about the Saxon series and how you got so interested in that era.
Well, I'd always been interested in the Saxons. And it had occurred to me a long time ago that the one thing that we English did not know about was how England came to be. I mean, I now live in a country and a citizen of a country where we can date our birthday absolutely, July the 4th, 1776. But although I had, I think, a good education in England, I never really knew how did England start. I mean, there was a day when somebody woke up and said, "Oh gosh, I'm English." When was that and how did it happen? And I thought, well, that would be a good story to tell. So that's where the series started, wanting to tell this story. And almost every historical novel, not all, but most, have a big story and a little story. The little story is the one you make up. It's in the foreground, and in the background there's the big story, which might be the American Civil War or whatever it is. But my big story was the making of England. The little story was to take this hero who had taken part in it.
And where did your hero come from?
Well, he comes from Bamborough, which is a wonderful castle on the coast of Northumberland. But he really came because when I was, I think, 58 or 59, I met my real father for the first time. I was a byblow of the Second World War, and he was a Canadian airman who proceeded to have an affair in England. I don't blame him. And I was the result. And I discovered him when I was 58 and met him. I went to see him in Victoria. And he produced a family tree. And I looked back through the family tree, which went all the way back to Woden, the god Woden. But on the way, there was this character called Uhtred. In fact, several men called Uhtred, who had been lords of Bebbanburg, which is now Bamborough. And I thought, wow, I've been wanting to write this story about England, and I've got an ancestor who was there. So I thought, let's take him. Because I invented almost everything about him, because we don't know very much at all. But I thought, well, I've got the right to do that, because he's my great, great, great many times grandfather, which he is.
So he was a real character in history.
He was a real character, yes.
Much more than his name you really don't know. So you invented the rest.
Yeah, I mean, he's not known in history at all, although I suppose some historians know who he is. He held on to Bebbanburg, which was this extraordinary fortress, which was turned into Bamborough Castle. And he held it even though the Vikings had conquered all of Northumbria. Well, there it is. There's the wonderful Bamborough Castle. And that belonged to our family until 1016, when they lost it through treachery. But even though the Vikings ruled all of northern England, they didn't rule the lands that Bamborough owned. And so I thought, well, there's an interesting story. How the hell did they hold on to it? How did they manage to resist the Vikings for so long? And I changed that as I wrote the books, but that was if you like, the genesis of it. And is the most magical, wonderful place. Absolutely gorgeous.
I mean, that almost looks like a painting, but that is a photograph, isn't it?
It's a photograph. I met the owner about 5 or 6 years ago, and I pointed out to him with some force that it had been stolen from us in 1016, and if he had any honor or decency, it would be returned. And his answer was very clever. He said, "Do you want to see the heating bills?" He said, "No, it's yours." So he still has it.
Fair enough, fair enough. But isn't that amazing? And what relationship then was your ancestor to Alfred, King Alfred?
I doubt they even met, to be honest. It's possible they did, but I really doubt they met. So I don't think there's a relationship there. And I'm not sure that Alfred, well, I think Alfred would have approved of Uhtred because he'd held on to his land, but the rest is all surmise and invention and fiction.
But it's interesting, isn't it, that we know, us English know so very little of that early history. All we know of Alfred is that he burned some cakes.
Yes, I know. It's really sad that Alfred, who was, the one king we call the Great, the only thing we're taught about him is that he was a bad baker, which is really ridiculous. And he actually was a very great king. He was also remarkably intelligent. And in the series, The Last Kingdom, David Dawson plays him quite miraculously well. I mean, to the point where you just have to believe this is what Alfred really was like. And he was an extraordinary man. He didn't see England created, but it was very much his vision. And because that was driven by the Viking invasion of Britain. Without the Vikings, I think it's arguable there might not be an England. and it very nearly became Daneland instead. I mean, it was a dreadful time.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, when you watch it and when you read it, you see that it's, as I said earlier, blood and guts. A lot of, and a lot of sex and romance, but ever such a lot of blood and gut.
I know there is an awful lot of blood and guts. Sorry about that.
Wouldn't have wanted to live in that time.
You would not. No, I have often thought that. And then you go to nice little country towns like Farnham in Surrey and find out that there was some extraordinary bloody battle there between Vikings and Saxons. And it's really hard to imagine. We think of England as rather a peaceful country, but once it really was racked with war, and out of that war, the country emerged.
Oh, absolutely. They say that England's soil is soaked in blood. And yes, the more you look into history, the more it is. And some of the prettier villages, as you said. What about your story? I said at the very beginning that your story almost reads like a romantic novel. But you've just explained there that you were the product of a wartime affair. And thus you were adopted into a peculiar family.
Indeed, a very peculiar family indeed. They belong to a religious sect called the Peculiar People, which was really a fundamentalist evangelical sect. It ceased to exist, which rather saddens me in one way. And they became the Fellowship of Independent Evangelical Churches, but they started in the mid-19th century, and they were a peculiar lot, and I didn't like them very much at all. I think there were only about 40 chapels, most of them in southeast Essex, a few in East London, and a couple in northern Kent. They had extraordinary rules. I mean, a lot of them are still shared by, I think, evangelical fundamentalists. I mean, no tobacco, no alcohol, no theatre, no television, although they gave in on that later, I think about the time of the Queen's coronation. I mean, in many ways, the things they disapproved of became my wish list, and I'm quite grateful to them for that.
That's right. I mean, they were fundamentalist Christians who didn't watch the television, and you ended up being an atheist and went into television.
Exactly, yes. And yeah, I've often thought that. And another thing they disapproved of very strongly was military service. And in the First World War, very bravely, many of them were sent to prison on Dartmoor rather than serve in the forces. And I mean, again, I became fascinated by the military. It was forbidden fruit. And so I've made my living writing stories mostly about military history fiction.
You really were a rebel. You ended up in a very important role in British television. You were the head of BBC Northern Ireland for a while. Then you went to Thames Television, one of the big ITV stations in Britain, for a while. What, in the end, I mean, you were actually in Northern Ireland during the worst period, some of the Belfast troubles.
Yes, we were.
What was
and
it?
I absolutely loved living in Belfast. And I mean, there's a wit in Belfast, which is razor sharp and snake fast. So it was a very funny place to live, and also a very kind place to live. I think if you live amid a lot of troubles, there were a lot of bombs and bullets flying around, people will club together and cling together. So I actually did love Belfast enormously, and haven't been back for much too long, but I will.
But there you were with what we'd call a very respectable job in the BBC. But you did try your hand even then at writing, inspired, as you said, by Hornblower.
Yeah, I decided that I didn't know how long my television career would last. And so I thought, well, why not be a novelist? So I did try, but it didn't get very far, perhaps because I was simply too busy producing television to actually write a book. And then I remember one week the government in Northern Ireland produced a white paper, or maybe a green paper, I can't remember, on Northern Ireland's industrial future, which we didn't have, to be honest, but never mind. We were duty bound to cover this in the programme. And then they cancelled or delayed the publication of the thing for a month or so. So we had a huge hole in the schedule. And I looked at the schedule and I saw that the Northern Irish Tourist Board, in its great wisdom, had invited a group of American travel agents to visit Ulster as a tourist destination, which seemed a little bit weird, I mean, considering what was actually going on in Northern Ireland. But they'd offered it, you know, we might be interested in this. And I said, yes, I am interested. So Gavin Ezra and I, he was my reporter, set off for Edinburgh, where the travel agents were gathering. And the Northern Irish Tourist Board, who could see trouble coming down the pike, had tried very hard to dissuade us from filming this. And they said, well, you'll never get 2 words out of them. They're American travel agents, they can't talk, you'll not get an interview. And they were very, very convincing. So Gavin and I really went to Edinburgh to find out whether any of these people could talk at all. And I can remember I was standing in the lobby of, I think it was the King James V Hotel in Edinburgh. And these people were gathering, and the lift doors opened and a blonde walked out. And I said to Gavin, I'm going to marry that one. And it took me 18 months, but I did. And we're still married 40 years later.
That is amazing. And that is really true. You knew the minute you looked at her.
Well, I knew she was special. She is.
Yes, still is, which is wonderful to know. And that's what I mean. I mean, what an old softy you are, really, for somebody who writes battles and deaths and the historical novels that you're so well known for. You have a backstory.
And then it turned out that Judy, for very cogent reasons, couldn't move to Britain, basically because of family reasons. So if the course of true love was to run smooth, I had to go to the States. So I did, and I couldn't get a green card. So I said to her, don't worry, darling, I'll write a book. And I sat down in New Jersey and wrote the first Sharpe book. We've been doing it ever since.
That's incredible too. I know that you've written a sort of guide to the Sharpe books called Sharpe's Story. And in it, you tell your own story to a certain extent, the story you've just said. And you said what a stupid risk you took, really, by saying, I'll come to the States, we'll be together, I'll make my living as an author. You didn't know that you could.
I had no idea. I mean, it was crazy. It was driven by a blonde. And I mean, really, I mean, it was totally for Judy. But it worked.
Yes, why? Why did it work in the States when it hadn't worked in Belfast?
Well, I don't think it has anything to do with the geography, except I suppose if I'd stayed in Britain, I'm not sure I'd have been brave enough to leave the job I had. It was a good job. And to totally throw myself on the mercy of thinking I could write a novel. I think it was desperation. I mean, if I wanted to be with Judy, I had to do something that would make money, and I wasn't allowed to have a job over there. So what are you going to do?
Well, you went back to your idea of writing a sort of land-based hero, and you came up with Sharpe, and I think that would have been 1981.
I think the first book was published in 81, yeah.
And you didn't just write one Sharpe book that year, you wrote 2.
Well, yes. I used to write 2 books a year until I fell among actors. How
did you get noticed? I mean, how did you get those books in front of the publishers? Because in the end, they offered you a 7-book deal.
Well, that was all due to a wonderful man called Toby Eady, who was a literary agent. And Judy and I had been invited to a Thanksgiving Day party in New York, and the party was held in an apartment that overlooked Central Park East Side. And I was standing on the balcony, and the McDonald's All-America High School Band were high-stepping beneath us, playing selections from Oklahoma or something. And a voice in my ear said, they do this sort of thing frightfully well, don't they? And I, being a brilliant conversationalist, said, oh, you're English? And he said, yes. I said, what do you do? He said, I'm a literary agent. I said, I've written a novel. To which he replied with one word. It's 4 letters, and I'll go bleep. And he turned around and he walked away from me. So I followed him into the room. And I said, I've had an offer on the novel. So, of course, hearing that money was involved, his eyes lit up. He said, how much? I said, £3,000 world rights. Then he said, it must be a bleeping awful novel, and walked away a second time. So I got him a third time. And I begged him, please, would you read this book? Because I know the offer I've had is good enough. He said, oh, dear boy, if you must, meet me at the Grand Central Station Oyster Bar tomorrow at midday. So I did that, gave him the book, and a rather awkward conversation with him over lunch, and then went home. And he phoned that evening and said, how much money do you want? And I had no idea what to say. But within 2 weeks, I had a 7-book contract and enough money to spend another year in America.
Yeah. And that's just the start
So
of
it was pure luck. It
Sharpe.
was pure luck.
Yeah, a luck and drive, as you said, and the need, the necessity to make a living.
Yes.
Where did Sharpe come from?
I have no idea. I never know where they come from. I mean, I knew I wanted to do, if you like, Hornblower on land, so he'd be an officer in Wellington's army. The only thing I worked out about him before I wrote the books was that he'd come up from the ranks and he'd been promoted from private to corporal to sergeant and then become an officer, and that he'd be uncomfortable in the officers' mess. And he's stayed that way ever since. He still is, 20-odd books later, even though he's now a lieutenant colonel.
Yes, he's gruff and gritty, as I said, and made his way up.
Grumpy as hell.
And presumably you'd done enough research to know that that was possible.
Oh, yes. I based his promotions on a man called John Ellie, who joined the British Army as a trooper in the cavalry, and by the time of Waterloo was a lieutenant colonel. And quite a lot of men were, in fact, promoted from the ranks. You had to be able to read and write, obviously be a sergeant. And usually you had to do something extraordinarily brave, which Sharpe does. There's a Duke of Wellington says to him, we didn't give that award for bravery, we gave it for insanity. So, but he wasn't that unusual.
No, but you made him into a character that in the end TV was interested in, and ultimately cast Sean Bean as Sharpe. But there's an interesting story even to that, because Sean Bean wasn't actually the first choice.
No, he wasn't. And I can't even remember now who was.
It was Paul McGann.
Paul McGann, that's right. And poor Paul, they were filming in the Ukraine, and they played a soccer match on the beach between the actors and the, I don't know, Ukrainian army extras. And he did something dreadful to his leg. I mean, he injured himself so badly that he simply couldn't go on filming. And they had, I think, 10 days to turn the whole thing round. And they meant a new Sharpe, all sorts of new things. And I don't think they'd even given Sean an audition the first time round. Anyway, they brought him in, and there's a celebrated photograph of Sean wearing his rifleman's jacket, and it's sort of open here, and there's lots and lots of bare chest. Well, the reason for that was that Paul McGann was much smaller, and they didn't have time to make Sean a new jacket, so they simply gave him that one.
And chest always works, actually. How did you feel when you saw Sean Bean in the role? Did you think it was right?
Perfect, absolutely perfect. And although I never saw Sharpe looking like Sean in my head, still don't, I hear his voice when I write it. I hear Sean's Yorkshire voice. And I actually think Sean was, I mean, he was as much an accident as me becoming a writer, but it was the perfect accident. He was just magnificent. And I think he looks back on it with great affection, that period. I think they filmed over 21 episodes.
I'm sure he does. It's interesting, though, you even adapted the way that you wrote Sharpe later with Sean Bean in mind.
Yes. I mean, I no longer said he was black-haired, because too many people would write to me and point out, as if I hadn't noticed, that Sean didn't have black hair, to which there's really no answer at all, except live with it.
Now, how many Sharpe books are there altogether?
There are 21, and I'm writing the 22nd.
It's incredible that, but that must, because you're following his very long career, that must require an awful lot of knowledge of the places he goes to, because if you look at the places, you go from Portugal, you go all through various different battles, England, France, obviously the Napoleonic France, you take him back to Yorkshire, Battle of Waterloo, India. Have you been to all of those places in
I've
order
been to all of them, yes.
You have.
And that was part of the joy of writing it. It's very hard to write a book about a place if you don't go there. And one of the disadvantages of COVID is that the present book I'm writing with Sharpe is set in Paris. And although I've been to Paris 2 or 3 times, I haven't been there looking at it through Sharpe's eyes, which I would certainly have done if it wasn't for COVID. But yes, I mean, I always regretted that Wellington didn't fight campaigns in Tahiti, but instead, you know, it's also it's a huge privilege. I mean, following Wellington's footsteps through India was quite wonderful, and you learn things about those campaigns that aren't in the books, and the same in Spain and Portugal. And I think I don't know how often I went to Waterloo, probably 10 times. And you have to go, and you do discover things about which aren't in the books, not even in the original letters and diaries that they wrote. And I guess it's part of the joy of going. I mean, I've dragged my pacifist yoga teaching wife through more battlefields than she cares to remember.
I'll bet.
Poor thing.
Yeah, but it is. How else do you do your research? Do you just read a lot?
You read a lot. Read everything there is to read, especially the original sources, the letters and the diaries, and then just read and read and read. And yeah, I mean, that's what this room is. It's. I mean, over there, that's full of Napoleonic books. Thousands.
And I guess you pick up little instances, little tiny anecdotes that you would never have thought of, and you can write them in.
You do. I mean, there's an awful lot that you steal from these other people. And sometimes you get ideas for a whole book. I was reading a wonderful book about crime and punishment in England in the late 18th and early 19th century. And in a footnote, I came across a reference to a man who was basically an investigator for the Home Secretary. And his job was that when somebody who'd been condemned to death sent an appeal for mercy, which went to the king, and it ended up on the Home Secretary's desk, he would say to this guy, go and see if there's any merit in what he says. And I thought, well, this is the first detective, and no one's ever noticed it. So that ended up as a book called Gallows Thief, which I'd quite like to do another one with him, but I don't know if I ever will.
Yes, again, at the moment that's a one-off, isn't it? But it was about this thing called the Bloody Rules.
It was about a man condemned to death for a murder he didn't commit. But again, that came from reading and just thinking how very odd that this is the very first time a detective is appointed. He's not called a detective, but that's what he is. So why not invent him? Because you don't know who the man was.
And you call yourself not a historian, but a storyteller.
Yes, totally. I always deny being a historian. Well, because my job is to tell stories, and much of every book is fiction. And although there's a big story in the background, and you may, and I hope you are interested in how England was created, I hope you're more interested in whether Uhtred will stay alive. And my job is to keep you up at night. So if you're reading the book and you think, I need to turn the light out, but I need to know what happens in the next chapter, I've succeeded. So, yes, I'm a storyteller, and I don't know what the trick of being a storyteller is.
Shame, because I was going to ask. We'd all like to know, really.
I mean, essentially, after doing it for over 40 years, I reckon that the good luck has come through being able to tell a story, but I don't know if I could ever tell anybody else how to do that.
But you do what you spoke of earlier. You set a small story within a big story.
Yes.
But are some periods of history just too recent to write about for you?
For me, they are. I mean, for other people, no, obviously. I mean, I'm really not tempted by either of the 20th century's big wars. There's too many ghosts, too many people who have relatives or people they remember who fought in them, and it's just too recent. I like to stick to.
It's like you say, you don't want to answer to the ghosts.
Yeah, Although I admire those who do write and sometimes enjoy their books too, but it's not for me.
Do you mind if we go on to some questions? We've got so many questions coming
Whatever
in
you like, Al.
all over the world. Before we move on to them, let me just mention that we are having a few sound problems. And I think if you're watching, wherever you're watching in the world, if you're hearing a bit of an echo, I do apologise. We're trying to fix it, but please bear with us. I'll keep my questions short because I think, Bernard, when you speak, you're all right. So Noel in the United States says, any advice for the writer and on getting a literary agent besides persistence and luck?
No, well, the answer is persistence and luck. Sorry. I don't know how you, I mean, I stumbled over mine at a party, as I just said. So go to lots of parties and drink large Bloody Marys like I did, and one day you'll meet a literary agent. Other than that, you can look at the sort of professional literature, the bookseller or whatever the magazine is, and you'll find in there the names of literary agents and who they, you know, it'll announce that so-and-so is working on and selling a new novel by Anne Diamond or Bernard Cornwell or whoever. And if Anne Diamond writes the same sort of books as you write, then you know that literary agent might be good for you. I mean, I think one problem is people pluck the names of literary agents out of a writers and artists yearbook and don't bother to read what their specialty is. But good luck.
Research.
Yeah, good luck, Noel. I want to read your first book.
Thomas says, now this is fascinating because you write a lot of battle scenes. He said, when you are writing a fight scene between two or more warriors, do you choreograph it in your mind?
Yes, but I don't really plot the whole thing out because I can't ever plot anything out. I mean, Sharpe is about to fight an horrific battle in the book I'm literally in the chapter I'm writing now, and I still don't know how it's going to start. It's going to be a one-on-one with a Frenchman, and I do know how it will end, but I don't know how badly Sharpe will get beaten up while he does it. You see what they see, hear what they hear, smell what they smell, but with any luck, don't feel what they feel, at least only emotionally. And yes, I do see the whole thing in my head and describe it, and then very often have to go back and change it to make sure Sharpe wins. I cheat terribly with him.
How many battles per book?
Oh, 3.
Beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah, more or less. But the one at the end has to be the big one.
Yes. Mark in the US says, since you're returning to the Sharpe series, do you think you'll return to the American Civil War series with Nathaniel Starbuck or the standalone sailing thrillers?
I think the answer to that is no to both. Sorry about that. I am thinking, because I'm not sure what I'm going to write next. I am thinking of going back to some of the medieval books I wrote, because I get a lot of questions on the website from people saying, will you please give us more of Thomas of Hookton? So I may go back to him. If there's any clue at all, I just ordered a whole lot of books on early 14th century European history. So.
And keep reading until you're inspired.
Exactly.
Chris in the US says, which of your book characters is your personal favourite?
Oh, which of my book characters is my personal favourite? Well, I mean, I have to be very fond of Sharpe and of Uhtred because they've seen me through some long years together. I mean, you do fall in. I mean, I'm very fond of Lady Grace and Sharpe's Trafalgar, and always wish that hadn't been written so long after the other Sharpe books. Otherwise, I could have kept her alive. But because she was a latecomer to the series, she had to die before the next book, which was sad.
And when you start writing, do you have lots of stick-it notes? And do you know where the story is going to go? Or is it
Not a clue. Not a clue. I mean, I really don't. If you take a book like Sharpe's Sword, which is around the Battle of Salamanca, I know that the book will end at the Battle of Salamanca, but how he gets there, I have no idea, or what difficulties he'll face on the way. And I just really cannot plot a book out. I mean, with the last book, Warlord, I knew it had to end at the Battle of Brunanburg because that was the battle that made England. But again, how he got there was a complete mystery. And it's, in many ways, it's a very, very inefficient way of writing a book. I mean, what I should do is sit down and spend 3 months plotting it out meticulously. I know some writers do this. Then all I need to do is sit down and say, oh, that's what I'm doing today, and type away. But I can't do it. I just can't do it. And if I do it, I change everything on the first page. Because I do find that the characters will do whatever they want to do. And I hear them talking. When I take the dog for a walk or having a shower, I hear my characters having conversation and think, oh, that's what you want to do. And I often think, you know, I rarely know how to end a book. And I wait basically for the shower or for the dog walk to tell me how to end it.
I was going to ask you, do you dream about your characters?
Oh, yes. Yes, I dream about them and think about them and hear them in my head all the time. And very often the conversations are not about the book. I mean, it's just a slice of their life, which is very odd, but it's actually really rather nice. And I'm on chapter 12 of this, what would be like the new book. And I really do not know how it will end, which is a bit dark because I've only got about 3/4 of a chapter to go. But I'll just let Sharpe off the leash and see what he does. And if he gets into real trouble, then I have to go back 3 chapters and change something to give him an advantage.
What stage is he at now?
He's just after Waterloo, and they're in Paris, and the French have not yet surrendered, and things are quite tense. And they'll get even tenser with Sharpe involved.
Yeah. An eventful life, certainly.
Oh yes, it's more lives than a basket full of cats, poor man.
You are such a great storyteller when you're writing. Do you type?
I type everything on, but it's all on a PC. I mean, I live with this thing.
Oh my goodness, it's a big one. Oh, pardon the expression. But can you do it orally? If I were to invite you to my local bookshop and say, tell us a story, could you do it orally?
I've never tried. I wouldn't know. I mean, I'd tell you a story, but it might not be one of mine. It's somebody else's.
Yes. And what about your sailing? I know that where you are now, Cape Cod, you love sailing. You've written it. Have you been able to do that very much?
Well, we don't sail in Cape Cod much through the winter unless you're a bit of a masochist, and I'm not. And I don't think I'll put the boat in the water until the end of May. But then, yes, we'll do a lot. I mean, we sail a lot in the summer. And that's another reason not to do 2 books a year, because it cuts into the sailing. But yes, I do love it. The boat is called Seraph. And I'd owned it a whole year before I realized that was an anagram of Sharpe.
My goodness, that was a coincidence.
It was purely a coincidence. I crossed the Atlantic with a friend in his boat. His boat was called Seraphim. And because he's a very good friend and sails with me, I said, well, we'll remember Seraphim by calling her Seraph. And it really was a whole year before someone said to me, you know, that's an anagram. And I thought, oh my God, it is.
It is. Is there, I mean, I know now that you are a US citizen, is there anything you miss about Britain particularly?
Cricket, rugby, decent beer, Scotch eggs, steak and kidney pudding, all sorts of things.
There's a list.
Yeah. Radio.
But in a normal year, you would come back to Britain
at least twice, yeah. I mean, Julie and I normally come for a theatre trip towards Christmas and just haunt the West End and see everything.
It'll be a while yet, won't it?
And then very often we come over when a book is published. Well, I'm hoping that we can get over later this year. I mean, we miss it too much.
And I know that you've actually been on a Viking cruise, and I think you've even got one book.
We've got one booked late this summer, and we're hoping to hell that COVID won't stop it. But yes, we're going up the Danube at the end of August, beginning of September. And I think 2 years ago we did the Rhine, which was wonderful. It was really a magnificent trip.
You watch the countryside go past you, don't you? It's
yes,
a brilliant way to travel.
You get spoiled as you do it.
What is the most, this is a very hard one, but what is the most interesting place that you've ever happened upon? A battlefield or something that has really affected you?
Oh, wow. Well, I'm often very affected by many, many battlefields because once you know as much as I tend to know at that point about what happened there, it's very hard to divorce those events from the place. And certainly, I mean, I always find Waterloo incredibly moving. I wrote a non-fiction book about Waterloo, so spent an inordinate amount of time reading the memoirs and letters and diaries of the men who had been there.
And is there any other era that you would like to get into at the moment?
I'm getting old now. I suffer from a condition called TMB, which is irreversible. It's called too many birthdays. And I don't know if I really want to start something entirely new. I mean, I might go back and fill in gaps, I mean, or do what I'm doing with Sharpe, just add one to the series. I just don't know. I mean, I'm not really looking to think that I'm going to bring it to an end.
No, you don't need to make yourself too busy, do you?
I've got 10 more books in me if I'm lucky.
Do you reckon?
Yeah.
I think there's probably more.
I
You just
hope.
can't help it, can you? You just need to do it.
Yeah, it's just fun. It's huge fun. I sometimes say to Jude, I get paid for sitting down and writing stories. I mean, it's an immense privilege.
Yeah, pretty good when you look back, huh? Probably better than being, you know, even in BBC Belfast.
Well, Belfast was fun. It was a huge amount of fun, to be honest. But yeah, I think probably this is better.
It was a different era.
Yeah.
Whereas I said, you said that it was a tremendous risk that you took going out to the States and absolutely being determined to make writing your career. But my goodness, didn't it work?
It worked. I mean, I know I told you I still start every book thinking I can't do this. And then have to say to myself, well, you have done it a few times. You probably could get away with it again. And it does feel like getting away with it. And, you know, there's a wonderful description in one of Terry Pratchett's books where he says to so-and-so who asked me the question in this book, and it jumped off the page at me, which was, you mean people pay you to do this? I mean, it's extraordinary.
Who do you read?
Hmm?
Who do you read?
Who do I read?
Mm.
Well, I mentioned John Sandford earlier. I just had the joy of getting one of his new books, Ocean Prey. So, I mean, that means I have a huge treat. I read an immense amount of history, just a vast amount of history. If I'm feeling in the least bit depressed, I reread a Terry Pratchett book because he's the funniest writer since P.G. Wodehouse. I mean, the books I've read in the last year, probably the most impressive was Maggie O'Farrell's Hamlet, which is an historical novel about Shakespeare's wife.
Mm.
And I think by far the best historical novel I've read in 20 years. But mostly it's history. I mean, I just soak myself in history.
Yes.
Keep reading it.
And that's, at the end of the day, that's what most writers say is the way to be a good writer is to be a good reader.
Oh, yes. I mean, kids sometimes say to me, what do I do to become a writer? I say, read. Just read everything. Till you find something you think you can do better than they do.
And of course, you have a terrific fan base because people buy into your characters so avidly. You get contacted by all sorts of people asking questions that, as I said at the beginning, you can't often answer because you've forgotten. And also people who totally believe you're fictionalized characters.
Yes, they do. I mean, years ago, I had a wonderful conversation with George MacDonald Fraser, who wrote the glorious Flashman books. And of course, there is no greater rogue than Flashman. And he said, I get annoyed, Bernard, he said. He said, people come up and tell me their great-great-grandmother had an affair with him, but he's fictional.
Yes.
And I mean, that's okay. I think George actually loved it when people told him that. He just pretended to be annoyed. But
you've had that, haven't you? You've had people who said, I am descended, or even in a previous life, I was that person.
Oh, yes, I get that a lot. I wrote a trilogy on King Arthur. He wasn't a king. And I got stacks of letters. I mean, I kept them all. I still have them. And the folder is about that thick. It's enormous. People would write to me saying, "Dear Mr. Cornwell, I read your book, The Winter King, and I have to tell you, you got it wrong. I was Lancelot in a previous existence." And I mean, to which the only answer you can do is say, "I'm awfully sorry. I wish I'd met you before, and you could have told me what happened." And I mean, an awful lot of people claim to have had a previous existence in Arthurian times. The other very popular era seems to be under the pharaohs in ancient Egypt, but very few claim to have been at Waterloo, which is sad because they could tell us something about it. But that's okay. I mean,
yes, there are periods of history that we find more glamorous than others.
Yes, and you venture into them at your own risk. I mean, certainly the books on Arthur, which I like a lot, caused immense rage with some people simply because it conflicted with their view of what had happened. And I mean, I absolutely respect their right to believe whatever they want to believe, but basically getting in there is rather like talking to the American Medical Association about healing crystals. You're not going to get very far.
Yeah. Leave them to their own thoughts. So I'm going to say goodbye to you now. We've been talking for an hour and it's been a privilege. What are you going to do now? Do you write now this afternoon, or are you going to relax?
The very next thing I'm going to do is to walk a small, importunate dog who is walking around on the floor looking at me, which means he wants to go out. I can't see him, but he's in here. So I'll walk in for half an hour and then I shall go back to chapter 12.
Well, the best of luck with that. Not that you need it. By the sound of it, the voices are already talking to you.
They will.
And we'll leave you for the moment. Thank you so much for joining us and providing us with more books.
It's been
At
a great
least another 10 we look forward to. Bernard Cornwell, thank you very much indeed. Well, there you have it. The amazing author, Bernard Cornwell. We'll leave him to get on with his dog walking and his writing. Let me just tell you that next week on Viking.TV, it's Art and Architecture Week. And my guest is the Norwegian-American artist Ida Lorentzen, whose paintings can be seen on board various of Viking's ocean ships. She's going to be showing us around her studio and discussing her inspiration and creative process. So that's something to look forward to next week. Thanks again to Bernard Cornwell. My apologies again if you were hearing the slight sound problems we had. There was a bit of an echo on some of the programme today. My apologies for that. We'll try and fix it maybe by tomorrow. But in the meantime, until next Thursday, please have a happy and safe week from me, Anne Diamond, and everyone here on Viking TV. Good night.